I'm Matt Landau from VRMB.com, and this is Unlocked, Season 7, Unglamorous. This episode's brought to you by quintessential, the leaders in smart home automation, and Breezeway, a property care and operations platform. Sallie Mitchell is the former owner of Casa Mar Azul in San Pancho, Mexico, which she managed from both the States and from upstairs in the portion of the property that she and her husband, Beau, lived. And I had the pleasure of visiting Sallie and experiencing her style of vacation rental hospitality firsthand, and have come to think of her business savvy as the quintessential rent-by-owner, with the scope of responsibilities and demands of the job greater today than it's ever been. Listen carefully for both the compass that Sallie used to make hard decisions easier, and the framing or presentation of her information or choice that landed clearly and comfortably in the hands of her guests, employees, and even her friends. More than anything, Sallie champions the idea that if vacation rentals feel like something you want to do, that you'd be good at, that would mean something, that you should take that leap, even though it's terrifying. At least in Sallie's case, hospitality's made her world larger, her life richer, and her stories hilarious to boot, which is really what we're all in for anyway, right? Let's go.
It was incredible to be paid to do for a living what people worked their brains out for in order to have a vacation and do what I was doing. And to wear a bathing suit and flippies to work, meet people from all over the world who came on the dive boat as well as stayed at this funky resort where it was all-inclusive, but not in the swanky, cheesy sense. There just wasn't any place else to go to get food. So we had to feed our guests. The dining room was set up with tables for 6. So we sat with guests, key staff members sat at a different table for every meal. So you would get to know people because you were diving with them. And the way I was a dive master, I wouldn't just sit by the anchor line and blow bubbles for 45 minutes. I would guide guests if they wanted to and show them things and teach them how to see, not just look at things, but how to make sense of what they were seeing. So that was a great adventure. And the only real rule that the management has was you never ask guests about work because they're there on holiday and it's not up to us to put them back at their job. And they never talked about their work. So you would just be chatting with people and have no idea this was the CEO of a major corporation or something else. So it was life-changing. It's like people say that about being in the armed service or serving in the Peace Corps. This was 2 years that completely transformed my life.
It's almost like people make themselves more vulnerable. And whether you're meeting them as a fellow traveler or you're their dive master, you're able to form these connections with people that you don't really get a chance to do in real life, so to say. What would you say you learned during those sort of formative years about tourism and why people choose to go somewhere and why they return to any given place that ultimately you used with your vacation rental business, which we'll talk about in a second?
Oh, it was a great laboratory in tourism and how people decide what destination they go to. First of all, know your tourist, know your guest. This place knew exactly who would love this place, and they knew exactly who would look around and then make a terrible face and say, "Get me out of here." They did not try to appeal to everybody. They had a very particular guest in mind, and did everything to attract that guest and not attract guests who would be unhappy. So that was super important. Another was having the guest feel seen as a person, as somebody interesting, as somebody valuable, as somebody you wanted to hang out with, rather than a credit card. Uh, and then, among one of the other things was give them a way to feel connected. You talk about this a great deal in your community. Um, One of the things we did, depending on the guest, well, even so, let's say, Matt, you were a first time guest. I had no idea who you were, but I found out you were routed through Nassau and you're going to have a long layover. So I would send you a letter, because this was before email, well before your arrival, and say, during your layover, Matt, could you please go to Traveler's Rest in Nassau? It's a short taxi ride from the airport, and pick up the mail from Joan and then bring it back with you when you come here. And by the way, they have the best banana daiquiris you have ever had in your life, as well as conch fritters. So you would obediently go to Traveler's Rest and have conch fritters and a banana daiquiri and bring in a box of mail, and you would arrive in the taxi and we would come rushing out to you and say, Matt, you brought the mail. and, and you were in, you were gold. You were family, and you had done this wonderful, wonderful thing, because again, this was before email, and getting letters was so exciting. Um, so that was a way to get guests involved. And then guests would give themselves assignments. The bar was often self serve, and we had a recipe booklet for the mixed drinks. And new guests would come in and not realize you weren't the bartender. So they would come up to the bar and ask you to make something, and you'd look at the reference sheet, and you'd make something and chat them up. And 2 days later, they'd realize you're a guest.
So this is like, you called it a laboratory, a live-in laboratory in tourism. And I think it sets the stage so nicely for where this conversation is going. But that was in your late 20s. You ended up having a really great career with communication strategy and copywriting with clients in the travel space. But eventually you decided that retirement was on the horizon. And I was hoping you could share with folks your general process for choosing where you and Bo were going to retire.
When I met Bo, I was living in coastal California, which is where I'm from. And you like little ducks, little ducklings, you get imprinted. And my imprinting is a Mediterranean climate near the ocean. And when I met Bo and realized he was the best man in the world, I agreed to move to Connecticut to marry him, because that's where a lot of his business was located, and there would be more robust job opportunities for me in New York City. So at first it was really exciting. Oh, look, there's trees everywhere, because in coastal California, you just don't have a lot of rainfall. And here, there are just so many bloody trees. And then it was exciting going into Manhattan and all of this stuff. But then I realized there's winter.
This thing called winter.
Yeah, and here it lasts, as far as the grayness and no leaves on trees, about 6 months. And my first winter here, I think one day the high was going to be 4 degrees Fahrenheit.
And when you say here, you're in Connecticut right now.
I am. I couldn't believe it that anybody would leave the house, because you could die out there. And so I gradually came to realize, when we're ready to retire, we need to get to some place where winter is not this severe. So that began what turned out to be about a 10-year exploration of looking at different islands in the Caribbean, other islands in the Bahamas, back to coastal California, where I'm from, and then moving on to various hill towns in Italy, as well as coastal areas of Spain. And about every 6 months, I would walk into the kitchen. Bo would be at the table reading the New York Times, and I'd said, here's where we're going to live when we retire. And he'd put the paper down and look at me and say, tell me all about it. So I would regale him with all of the features and benefits of each of these places. And about every 6 months, I would come up with a different place because something new had come up or I had moved on to something else. And so it was this continual search for a place. Of course, I'm very methodical and pragmatic. So I had made a list, and Bo had made his own list, and we merged our lists going from lifestyle and climate and things like that. And over the 10 years, we got older, and things that were low on the list, like the quality of medical care, moved up to the top of the list. So that changed some of the destinations.
And so ultimately, you zoom in on the Pacific coast of Mexico. I've had the pleasure of visiting your vacation compound and seeing you in your element. But initially, when you bought that home in San Pancho in 2014, you were just going and visiting every once in a while, right?
Yes, we were both working full time. And when we bought the house, it sort of came with a live in guy who was watching over the property because the owner had vacated and bought a new house and took all of his good furniture with him. So this guy was living there at the time rent free in exchange for keeping up with maintenance and paying the maid and the yard guy and things like that. So since we weren't ready to live there full time, we just said, cool, and had an agreement that we would give him some advance notice of when we wanted to come stay. He'd find someplace else to stay, and we would step into what felt like our house, but his style, which was very Louisiana Mardi Gras in Mexico. Yeah, so we were happy to go down for a week here, 10 days there, a couple of times a year for the first 2 years.
And those first 2 years lead into the official start, I think, of your vacation rental journey. And you were renting out the upstairs home, if I'm not mistaken, while you were building the new downstairs vacation home, correct?
Yes.
So the upstairs was a vacation rental first.
No, it was a personal home.
Okay.
We bought it from the guy who had built it and lived in it. And then he fell in love and got married, and there were kids, and it was a very spacious but one bedroom house. So they needed a house with more bedrooms. So he sold it to us after he had moved into his other house. But it had never been a vacation rental. It couldn't have been because the way it was furnished, it looked like it was the leftover patio furniture from a bad third marriage.
With a really amazing roof, if I remember correctly.
Yes. But after we bought it 2 years later, my job was outsourced. So all of a sudden our income plummeted, but the cash flow needs for running this property didn't plummet. And we realized we really needed to rent that house and go ahead and build the second house, which we always knew we would build as a vacation rental. So I took the 5-hour bus trip to Tlaquepaque in order to order custom furniture that was really, really lovely from different manufacturers, and it would be delivered in 12 weeks, and did other things to bring in textiles and artwork and all of that stuff. And then 12 weeks later, flew back to greet the truck that was unloading all of our beautiful furniture, just as there was a weather forecast for Hurricane Patricia, with the breathless declaration that this is the strongest, most powerful hurricane to form in the Northern Hemisphere since the time of tracking hurricanes began. And its projected path was zeroing in on our little village.
So this was like your omen, right? This is the right thing to do.
So The furniture was shipped in a pretty much an open air flatbed truck. So everything was very meticulously wrapped in plastic and the plastic taped in place with that packaging tape. So every rung of a chair and every little tiny thing was wrapped in this stuff. And I thought, perfect. If there's water damage, I'll just leave all the wrapping on because the moving guys normally remove all of that stuff and take it away. So I talked to our property manager to say, I'm really worried about this hurricane. It's really scary. He was a very laid back guy and stoned most of the time. And he just said, "Oh, don't worry about it. San Pancho has this magical vortex and it will just pass us by." And I thought, well, that's a little cavalier when you've got a category 5 barreling towards you. And I can't absorb the news because, well, there's no radio reception, and whatever there is, it's in Spanish. And our house didn't have TV. So I was really in the dark on this. And he kept saying, "Oh, don't worry. The hurricanes always just peel off. They never bother us anything." So that night I went to bed, and in the dark, way before daybreak, it must have been only 6 o'clock in the morning, but the sun doesn't fully rise to about 7:30 there. The phone rang. I fumbled around, picked up the receiver, said hello. And our property manager didn't even identify himself. His voice said, "It's heading straight for us. Pack your shit and get out of there right now." And I thought, okay, but where am I supposed to go? And he said, "Go to Topeka and find a hotel." Okay, well, that sounds really easy, but where is Topeka? And how do I get there? And how do I find a hotel? And so it was just this drama of what have we done? What am I doing here? And I'm here by myself and I didn't fill the gas tank and
But this process of putting together this vacation home, for me was an interesting example of identifying something that a need that you have, a want or a desire that you as a consumer, whether it's buying a piece of real estate or a home or even a product or a service that's not being met, some gap in the market that you're not able to easily satisfy yourself. You kind of built this thing that was made for guests like you, right?
exactly.
And is that correlated with what we were talking about earlier in terms of the kinds of people that you want to attract, the kinds of people that you know for a fact will appreciate those things?
Yes, because I already knew what the movie was in their heads about their vacations.
What was that?
I want to be someplace beautiful but not fussy. I want to feel comfortable and not have to be careful. I want to have a view. I want to have a really nice bathroom with lots of storage so I don't have to balance things on top of the bloody toilet tank lid. I want decent water pressure. I want to be able to drink the water out of the faucet and not have to drink bottled water. I want a super comfortable bed. And I just want to feel like this is my house.
So, is that advice you'd share with anybody who's considering getting into the vacation rental game, to sort of look inwards and ask yourself, what would you want if you were staying in this home?
It depends on the location and your reason for picking that location. If you're making a decision based on profitability and occupancy rate, your target audience may not be you. If you're at a ski resort and you're not a black diamond skier, but that's your target audience, you'll have some overlap, but it won't be a mirror of who you are. But if it's a good business decision and it also gives you a chance to just do fun skiing, then that's great. But the key would be just very intimately know your ideal guest, as if you were hiding under their dining room table when they were talking about where they wanted to go on vacation.
So, if someone's listening to this and they're still not exactly sure who that optimal guest is, I'm assuming the act of sitting down with your team And having the conversation about it in the first place is going to get you a good degree closer. But once you've got that sort of profile or avatar drafted, do you then reference that on a regular basis? Do you begin making your small decisions about how you're going to decorate or how you're going to equip a kitchen? Do you make all those decisions around this avatar? Is that like something that you, Sallie, did on a regular basis, or was it just kind of instinctive?
It was something I was deliberate about, but it also came instinctively. And yet I balanced it with what would be practical and what is reasonable, like kitchens. In the first house, I decorated it and furnished it for us because even though I knew that we weren't going to be retiring there yet and we would need to rent it, I made choices for what we would like. So I brought down those super expensive German knives. Well, I didn't do that in the other house that we built because they're just too costly. But I had really lovely Swiss knives in the new house. I learned some lessons in my choices from furnishing the first house that I corrected in furnishing the second house. Like you pick out upholstery the color of dirty feet.
Is that the official advice?
Yes. If you're in an indoor-outdoor climate like we were. And then you brighten it up with your accessories, the pillows and flowers and vases and artwork and things like that. But yeah, you want to think of what's the wow factor in each room, whether it's the view or artwork or a piece of furniture or even a beautiful decorative pillow or a throw or a bedspread. So what's the wow factor in every single room? And what little small delights can you provide? I just couldn't get over that people loved having Q-tips and cotton pads. That they just thought that was fantastic, that there was a big bunch of them, plus non-scented body lotion and magnifying mirrors, because our guests are at the age where you want a magnifying mirror. So they just really, really loved these touches, which did not cost much money at all.
And now, a word from our sponsors. We actually have our sponsors on the line, our fearless supporters in Point Central and Breezeway. I'd like to get started with Sean Miller, the president of Point Central. When looking at the safety of a vacation rental management organization, how does Point Central fit into that preventative strategy?
For us, safety is one of those things we see property managers. This isn't something you optionally provide. This is something that is just sort of always there, always evolving, and is just part of the guest's expectations. So for us, safety started around keyless, right? There was concerns before when you think of a mechanical key, again, how keys can get lost and duplicated. There's the risk there that those keys would be nefariously used. And so by moving to a keyless lock system with event history and other things, property managers could ensure that the right person only enters the home at the right time. And then things have evolved from there. So you can think of health has become a really big part of people's mental space for safety. So things on our end there of humidity monitoring or leak detecting that help make sure mold growth doesn't happen, we've seen be important to the overall safety. And then even as simple or as probably common as monitored life safety services. So Point Central as being a part of our parent company, Alarm.com, we have the ability to offer monitored fire and security services so that owners and property managers who want to provide a full monitored package can make sure that whether the home is occupied and a guest is in it, or the home is unoccupied and they just want to make sure it stays safe when no one's there, that they can do that and provide those services to their owners and their guests.
Jeremy, when safety comes up as a topic with property managers using Breezeway as a core piece of their technology stack, what ways are they addressing and avoiding any safety risks?
4 quick points on safety. The first is cleaning and making sure that when the properties are being cleaned and turned over, made ready for the next guest, that all the right parts of that job are being done and touched, and making sure that you have good records and understanding of the work that's being done to prepare that property. Same thing with inspections on point 2, making sure that you're actually going through the property on a routine basis, checking and making sure you understand the condition, or the folks that are working with you, contractors or your staff, are doing that and actually going through the properties. 3 is setting up recurring maintenance. We all typically work with unique properties that are all different, and making sure that you're hitting all the right preventative maintenance so that you can stay ahead of it, provide a safe quality experience for your guests. It's paramount. And on the 4th, at Breezeway, we do a lot with safety training. We work with Justin Ford, national expert on vacation rental safety, to help train property managers, our clients, and in the industry around safety and what they should be looking for, whether it's tripping hazards, fire and health safety, just to make sure we all want the same thing, right? Great experiences in the property.
The pandemic hits, and you in June last year sold everything in San Pancho. Is that right?
Yes, in June of 2021.
June of 2021. Is there a role for a crisis or an emergency or some kind of adversity in decision making for you?
We did not sell because of the COVID pandemic. That was another validation of our decision, but that was not the reason for the decision.
So this was already, you were already thinking about it, and this was kind of a final confirmation that, yes, it's time to begin our next phase.
Yes, and oddly enough, Matt, it's when we were in the process of buying this house in 2014, we asked, what's our exit strategy? We're buying a 1-bedroom house, which is not going to have a lot of appeal. We were the needle in the haystack for the seller.
Folks, please pay attention to what Sallie's about to say here. This phrase, exit strategy, sometimes has a stigma on the smaller end of the business spectrum, especially for a labor of love. But I tend to view it as a defense mechanism. Have a plan to exit safely and profitably from that which you've poured your soul into. What's way less glamorous is not having an exit strategy, and whenever that time comes that you're ready to move on, having no options and not being rewarded for all your hard work. This can feel disappointing, but listen carefully here. Sallie walks us through the steps.
Our strategy was, at some point, we're going to build on the property where there was room for a second house. So we wouldn't be selling a 1-bedroom house. We would be selling a 3-bedroom house. So we already had selling in mind before we bought, because we just realized that life goes through phases, and at some point we're going to need to sell it, and we want to make sure it would be very, very appealing.
And what was the influence of the vacation rental business in that sale?
That's a good question. It's in most of the jobs that I've had, I never lasted more than 2 Christmas parties. I would just get bored.
Thought you were going to say that you offended people.
No, if only. No, I would just get bored. It just felt repetitive. Like, I've already done this. I want to do something new. And so with the vacation rental business, designing the second house, furnishing the first house, it's doing a huge copywriting marathon to build the website, and doing a shot list for the photography, and storyboarding the videos, and all of that stuff was an exhilarating challenge. And when our website was still downloading, I got a phone call from somebody who was on the website and wanted to book. And I just thought, hot damn, this is great. So the startup phase was so stimulating and rewarding and challenging in the best of ways. And then sort of recreating my Bahamian resort lifestyle by having the opportunity to meet the guests and not necessarily hang out with them, because I know they didn't come to that kind of a place. They deserve their privacy. But some of those guests have become friends, like what happens with everybody who owns and has a chance to meet them.
For people who are listening, who, when they hear the phrase exit strategy, they think, I'm not in this just to make money. I'm not in this just for the business. I'm in this because I love it. I'm in this because I'm enjoying exploring it. What, in hindsight, can you share with folks about that exit strategy as it relates to any given home or a vacation rental business as a whole?
Well, making your final decision is pretty much completely made on emotion and then rationalized with logic. But I would include on your checklist as you're evaluating, is this the place or not, is looking at what's the resale opportunity. What other development in our area is going on? Is there going to be a batch of bright and shiny brand new properties? If you have a view, what's the risk of somebody blocking that view? And same thing with fresh water supply. Is what's the stability of that? Is there any threat to that? So kind of taking a long view, even if you decide to stay there or own it for multiple generations, I think you still need to consider these things that could negatively impact the quality of your experience when you're there.
Really well said. In hindsight, after sort of going through this full circle, what do you view as the weakest link of the vacation rental operation, at least in your world?
Housekeeping.
Hands down.
Yeah. There are numerous housekeepers in our village, but not necessarily up to the standard for a vacation rental, especially during peak season when you have same day turns. Also, there's a sort of a local practice that you don't use vacuum cleaners, you sweep. You don't use steam mops, you use a string mop and a bucket. So the cleaning practices can be slower to get the job done. And I made the mistake, I didn't get commercial sized washer and dryers. So that would be something, if you're doing your own laundry, either get commercial sized ones or have multiple washers and dryers to accommodate same day turns. But the housekeeping for a vacation rental, we had some fits and starts with people who were all lovely, but just couldn't keep up. And then we found a couple of gems and we paid them very, very well.
So I had a very similar experience with my vacation rental in Panama, in that we found the gems and we treated them really, really well. For if you were starting a new vacation rental business, God forbid, in a new destination, where would be the first place you go to solve this housekeeping challenge?
I would probably talk to our realtor to find out what's the local practice, and then just start asking around. I don't know if I were to do this in this make-believe scenario, if there would be a Merry Maids type franchise where they have a fully staffed crew, where a team comes in, which I think would be ideal, to say, okay, every Monday and Thursday, the team comes in, 3 people blitz the house, and they're out in an hour and a half. In Mexico, you have one housekeeper and you don't have a team. We did try that once. And the full-time housekeeper, we had a very heavy same-day turn period, and we thought our maid needed some help. So we brought in a backup maid to come clean with her. Well, it turned out our maid was on her phone the whole time, bossing around the backup maid. So, ay, babe.
In terms of guests and fulfilling that movie that they had in their head, I know you also are a big advocate of drawing a line, of being conscious how much is too much, what's not feasible financially or logistically. And I always reference this post that you wrote for VRMB. Are we creating an arms race of impossibly spoiled guests? And that moment, the story about the croissant, I think is worth sharing with folks who haven't heard it before.
For 3 years, Bo and I lived in our house for 6 months, from mid-November to mid-May, which coincided with peak season and also nuclear winter in Connecticut. And we brought our golden retriever with us, and he's a magnificent male named Brando, who has a very deep, big boy bark. And golden retrievers don't bark a lot, but he will do alarm barking if somebody's on the street or things like that. And we didn't want guests to get all annoyed. So we came up with a brilliant idea one morning when we were down at the bakery picking up croissants for us. Why don't we bring croissants to the guests, and we'll knock on the door with Brando, and they can meet Brando, and we'll give them croissant and tell them to preheat to 150 centigrade, put them in for 5 minutes so they get all crispy and buttery and melty and delicious, and go on our way back upstairs to our house. Well, we had a lot of dog people as guests, as it turned out, and Brando's a very handsome boy who thinks everybody is the most wonderful person he's ever met. So they would fall for Brando, and then they loved getting the croissant, and that was that. Well, one year we had repeat guests coming, an absolutely delightful couple we adore. And Bo was out of town on a business trip, and I was laid up with an illness and couldn't deliver them croissant first thing in the morning of their first wake up. But the next day, Bo came back. So he made the croissant run and took Brando and said hello. And I was visiting with them later, and they very sort of bashfully said, we thought we would only get croissant, or no, when you didn't come to the door the first morning, we wondered, do we just get croissant on our first day? So our friendly gesture to mitigate them hearing a barking dog had turned into guest policy.
And how, in hindsight, do you stop that?
That's a good question. I think it's 2 things. One is you decide what you can continue to do, because when we're not there, I never asked our property manager, the new one, who's wonderful, to go to the bakery and bring croissant to guests. That just wasn't the same thing, and unfair to ask her to do that. And the other is to tell guests when this is something special. We had another guest couple who have also become friends and we adored, who stayed in our first house while we were building the new house at a construction discount. And they would email us pictures of progress and things like that as we were in Connecticut and they were down there. And then they came back and stayed in the new house a couple of times. And they would stay for a couple of weeks. Well, with the new house, the washer and dryer were not accessible to guests. They were in a locked part of the garage because there was just no other place to put it. And so we would advise guests that they could take their laundry to the local lavanderia and pick it up at the end of the day. Well, I volunteered that I would give them the key to this locked room so they could do the laundry. And I made sure we had unscented laundry detergent because she was sensitive to things that have fragrance added to them. And then I'd email them that I'm going into Puerto Vallarta. Is there anything you want me to have on hand when you arrive, like sun lotion or something that you're going to use more than 3 ounces of because they travel carry-on? So I would pick up a very particular brand of this and then some mouthwash and other things that were on her list. And then she would also ask, oh, if you're going out, could you also pick up some grocery items? Well, we normally charge for this kind of concierge service, but they were lovely and I was going to be in Vallarta, so I thought, why not? And they were appreciative. And then on the third visit, when we were talking and having a very lovely conversation, they had started running a boat rental business for those liveaboard boats on big lakes. And they're talking about guests and repeat guests and giving them a discount for repeat bookings. And I'm just listening to them. And then they asked me, how come we don't get a discount when we come back?
Ouch.
And I almost launched out of my chair saying, well, wait a minute, you get access to the washer and dryer that nobody else gets access to. I bring you and don't even charge you for this suntan lotion and alcohol-free Listerine mouthwash. And I get these groceries for you. And it's just, I hadn't trained them properly. They just thought this is what they get and this is what they deserve. And now they deserve a discount on the rate.
And so what in hindsight would be the right training is it's stating that I'm going to do this special thing. It's drawing a line and clearly stating what is included and perhaps what's not.
Yeah, I would say, listen, we normally charge $100 US for grocery shopping, not counting the groceries because it's a big trip into Vallarta. It's not just going down to the corner market. And then you have to bring a cooler so stuff stays cold and frozen and blah, blah, blah. Or for concierge services like taking your laundry to the lavanderia or making restaurant reservations, there's a fee for concierge services. Now, hardly anybody asked for those services, but it was a way for me to say, these are not included in your rate. This is extra. But I did not repeat that to them when I volunteered these things because I liked them. I did not discipline myself to say they are paying guests as well as people I really, really enjoy. But this is a business. They're not personal house guests.
In taking a step a little bit back, you had a lot of repeat guests who you formed meaningful connections with. I'm kind of working on this theory that one of the biggest investments costs of generating a direct booking strategy, of driving people to book directly with you and or refer, is the actual stay, is the time that people are in the home. That is a new kind of marketing. In hindsight, do you think does that sound right to you, first of all?
I think it's a combination of the property, which is unique is too strong of a word, but it's special because houses with a similar view, a similar level of quality furnishings, a similar level of amenities in our village are much larger and much more expensive. So they're getting their fantasy vacation house without needing to travel with friends and share the cost. So that is a part of the reason we would get repeat booking, that they just love the house. And a lot of people say, I just love your kitchen. I just love it. Guests can stand it. There's no west wall, so there's nothing blocking your view of the Pacific Ocean. And you can be at the kitchen sink and say, oh, there's a whale. That doesn't happen very often. And then it's also the personal connection. We've had some guests that we really never felt close to, but they told us, we come back to your house because we feel safe. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And other people love our dog. So it's a combination of things that, and also I think they liked the slow drip pre-arrival communications where I'd provide what I thought would be helpful travel information. I get lost easily, so I put together super detailed driving directions from the airport with, okay, set your mileage marker, your travel mileage thingy to 0 at this point, and I'd have a photograph of what the highway looks like at that point. And then I would have kilometer by kilometer, practically, this is where you do this is where you do that. And I'd have photos of landmarks so people knew exactly which turnoff to take to go to the big supermarket on their way to our village, exactly how to find where the turnoff to the village is, exactly how to get to the house, how to get up our steep, scary driveway. And I think they just felt cared for rather than going back to, I'm just a credit card.
And is that something that you think you would have been able to pull off if you didn't have a physical presence in San Pancho?
To a degree, yes, because I'm very deliberate with the tone of voice in all communications, whether it's the website or the Facebook posts or my guest communications or my phone calls. I'm very consistent and personal in my tone of voice.
You are. I mean, you're very consistent with your tone of voice in this conversation. It's lovely to listen to.
Thank you.
Here's my last question for you, Sallie. This is the $1 million question. You've come full circle. Like I mentioned earlier, you journeyed down the vacation rental path. You learned everything on your own. You were part of a community, but you did a lot of lesson learning. And you formed meaningful connections with people. And you successfully exited the business onto the next phase of your life. Would you do this again?
Absolutely. It's just because it had an ending doesn't mean that there are any regrets. I'd written in a earlier post that dreams have a gestation period. We get an idea, we hold a fantasy, and we poke at it for a while, we do some research, and sometimes the possibility of that dream coming true presents itself. Most of us back off and come up with our list of excuses. But the people who decide that we would regret this for the rest of our life if we didn't do this, take that leap, even though it's terrifying as well as exhilarating. And so I have no regret of taking that leap and having this fantastic experience where it made our world larger, it made our lives richer. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
I don't think I could have expressed the virtues and rewards of our industry, our craft, any better than that. And heck, I don't think back when I was operating my own vacation rentals, I could have been nearly as elegant with the ugly problem solving as Sallie was either. But my big takeaway from our conversation today is that if you sense that you're good at hospitality, at taking somebody into your heart, your mind, your corner of the earth, even if just for 1 or 2 nights, to take that leap and give vacation rentals a try, but to do it right. Pour thought into everything from the utensils to the marketing to the croissant allotment, and lean entirely on your personality, your backstory, your judgment calling, your own tastes and preferences. Being your own boss and writing your own terms can be equally terrifying as it is exhilarating. And when you share that feeling with others, it makes more than just money. It makes for meaning and purpose. And that is about all we could ask for in a job, a calling. Sallie's no longer running her vacation rental, but she is still an active and contributing member of VRMB communities. So if her thoughtfulness resonated with you, consider joining us and nearly 1,000 other independent owners and managers around the world in our private forum, VRMB Communities, where we're building our own businesses on our own terms, but we're doing it together. You can sign up at vrmb.com/join.